Hello and welcome to the LLG Grapevine podcast. You're listening to Helen Bennett, LLG's Executive Director of Policy and Governance, and Dennis Hall, LLG Bulletin Editor.
Hello, everyone.
Now then, lots going on as usual. I say it every week. We've got proposals for benefit fraud and debt recovery being taken from banks without a court order. A Heathrow expansion might be back on the table. And we had a pretty much entirely focused PM question time on the schools bill. And in Wales, members of the Senate who break rules on behaviour could face a referendum-style vote on whether they should continue to serve. Reorganisation of local authorities continues, meanwhile, to dominate in England, and the question of debt has been raised. Dennis.
Yes, indeed, Helen. Well, here's something the government's devolution white paper didn't quite consider or indeed foresee. The leader of Surrey County Council has suggested that local authority debts should be written off as part of local government reorganisation. In a letter to the Minister for Local Government and English Devolution, Jim McMahon, Councillor Tim Oliver said reorganisation agreements should consider how to manage the unique, significant financial risk of the level of debt currently held across the Surrey local government footprint. He added, any proposals for local government reorganisation will need to adequately consider how to ensure the sustainable operation of any new authority or authorities without ongoing exceptional financial support from government or a level of write-off. Now, many will wonder why the taxpayer should foot this bill for these local financial failures. Woking became the biggest financial failure in local government history in 2023, declaring effective bankruptcy after its multi-billion-pound spending spree involving residential skyscrapers, a hotel, and shopping centres, which turned sour. Nonetheless, Surrey County Council applied to be part of the government's priority devolution programme last week in a move that could see two-tier authorities in the county merged to become unitary councils. Woking Borough Council, which is among 12 of the councils in Surrey, is said to have £2.1 billion in debt. That's an eye-watering level of debt for a district council to have racked up. And another of Surrey's councils, Spelthorne Borough Council, meanwhile, had around £1 billion in debt as of March 2023. And once again, this is an unprecedented sum for a small council to have taken on. Now, Surrey County Council expects, as we predicted, that the process of negotiation and reorganisation will last around 2 years, with any new authorities in the county launching in spring 2027. Helen, this really is a headache for government. Commentators all said that these districts in Surrey went beyond boundaries in the steps that led to these huge levels of debt. And many will argue that the UK taxpayer shouldn't foot the bill. But many will also say the council taxpayer shouldn't pick up the tab either for any of this. But who should pay? Well, we'll see how this plays out. Not many savings here from reorganisation, Helen.
Well, it's going to be divisive, isn't it, Dennis? I mean, not least because I think Surrey's long been the richest county in England. It's got some of the highest house prices in the UK. I think the average is just under 600,000, and it's the second most expensive place to live outside of London, according to the house price index. So attention will certainly be on what the government decides to do. And of course, it could just simply choose to mandate regardless of debts. So let's see. Let's move to other news. The judiciary is to produce a new strategy to tackle underrepresentation of Black judges and improve accommodations for disabled judges as part of its work on judicial diversity for 2025. And there's going to be a new strategy implemented in 2026. Now, the previous strategy had 4 core objectives, and I think it's arguable whether or not it was met. The paper suggests that the targets were met, but if I just outline what they were, there was creating an environment in which there is greater responsibility for and reporting on progress in achieving diversity and inclusion, supporting and building a more inclusive and respectful culture and working environment within the judiciary, supporting and developing the career potential of existing judges, and supporting greater understanding of judicial roles and achieving greater diversity in the pool of applicants for those judicial roles. Now, the overarching aim of the new strategy would be to increase the personal and professional diversity of the judiciary by increasing the number of applicants from diverse backgrounds. So it's not just a question of who is appointed, it's a question of the fact that the roles simply aren't even attracting the applications. And the strategy wants to support inclusion, retention and progress. Now, Lord Chief Justice Carr and Sir Keith, I'm afraid I don't have the surname, Lindblom, they suggested that in commentary on the strategy that they recognise that there's more to be done and encourage all to continue engaging with leaders and colleagues to explore how individuals can contribute to achieving the objectives of the strategy. Now, Sir Keith Lindblom is the senior president of tribunals, and I apologise if I've pronounced his name wrong. He went on to say that throughout 2024, much hard work had gone into advancing the objectives of the strategy, and progress has been made across all areas in encouraging a more inclusive working environment. The coming year will see a continued emphasis on two specific issues, and these are the main issues currently affecting the sector, and that's addressing the underrepresentation of Black judges and improving accommodations for disabled judges. And he said that they would conduct a review which will focus on the extent to which the objectives set out in the strategy have been met. Now, I went back and looked at some of the statistics, and they're not great, Dennis. Since 2014, the ethnic minority proportion of barristers increased from 13%, which is not great, to just 17%. Solicitors went from 15 to 19%, and chartered legal executives from 5% to 11%. That's the biggest jump. But I mean, we're talking about 11 years for what was 4% for barristers in terms of ethnic minority proportions. And across all legal exercises in 23-24, ethnic minority candidates accounted for 15% of the eligible pool and 16% of recommendations. And for Asian candidates, the proportions were 9%. But let's take a look at Black candidates here, just 2%. So there's definite room for improvement, Dennis, without a doubt. So it's welcome that they've acknowledged it and they're attempting to make efforts to address it. Now, ethics are still very much the subject of concern with regulators, I believe, Dennis.
Well, yes. The Legal Services Board, the LSB, has decided that lawyers' lack of proper regard for ethics and their disproportionate focus on client interests above all else means inevitably that regulators need to take action to improve compliance. Helen, this is something we've been predicting for some time. It is set to require all the frontline regulators, like the Solicitors Regulation Authority and the Bar Standards Board, to put new measures in place to improve ethical standards and behaviours. Following its 3-year professional ethics and rule of law project, the LSB's board, the full board, met on the Tuesday, the 21st of January, to approve for consultation a draft policy statement which sets out 5 outcomes to support lawyers in understanding and upholding their professional ethical duties. The regulators will then be required to report on how they achieve these outcomes. The paper before the board cited issues like the Post Office scandal inquiry, misuse of non-disclosure agreements, and concerns over strategic lawsuits against public participation as putting ethical behaviour in the spotlight. The conclusion reached by the LSB executive, the paper said, was that there was a case for regulatory intervention, and they've set out 5 key outcomes. The first outcome in the draft policy statement is that regulators should ensure that lawyers have the right knowledge and skills on professional ethical duties, both at the point of qualification and throughout their career. Outcome 2 is that regulators should adapt their rules, regulations, guidance, and other resources to ensure that professional ethical duties are the core foundation for the way lawyers behave and act throughout their careers. Outcome 3 is to ensure lawyers are supported and empowered to uphold their professional ethical duties when they are challenged. And on this, the paper noted the significant roles workplace culture and leadership played in influencing and enabling ethical conduct, but that codes of conduct and guidance did not generally consider them. Outcome 4 is to identify and use appropriate tools to monitor lawyers' conduct and, where necessary, take action to address non-compliance with ethical duties. Outcome 5 is to periodically evaluate the impact of the measures taken to achieve the other 4 outcomes. None of this is surprising, Helen, and my piece for LLG's Inspire programme reviews what's been happening on in-house lawyers and ethics and includes a tailor-made checklist for what you should be doing right now. Helen.
Well, it does, Dennis, and it's a highly beneficial course for those aspiring to be an MO, but actually it's really good for those new to the role, or for those, you know, long in the tooth who want an appreciation of how ethics impact governance and vice versa. It's always good to be considering these different elements in an ever-changing landscape. So I would urge members to take a look at that course. Now I'm going to move to planning next because there's lots of reforms happening there, but I want specifically to look at local plans. Just a refresher, I know most members know this, but the National Planning Policy Framework states that the planning system should be genuinely plan-led. Succinct and up-to-date plans should provide a positive vision for the future of each area and a framework for addressing housing needs and other economic, social and environmental priorities. So the Minister of State wrote to the Planning Inspectorate in July of last year, I think it was the 30th, and set out in that letter the government's expectations as to how to plan examinations, how plan examinations, should be conducted, and how pragmatism should be applied to this process by examining inspectors. And the letter reiterated that local planning authorities must not submit local plans unless they think they are ready for independent examination. And it indicates that LPAs should not therefore submit deficient plans, believing that inspectors will use significant time and resource during examinations to, quote, fix them. The letter emphasises that pragmatism should only be used in examinations where it's likely that a plan is capable of being found sound with limited additional work to address soundness issues. There's lots of pragmatism in this, I've noticed. It sets out that pragmatism should not be used to address fundamental issues which could be likely to require pausing or delaying the examination process for over 6 months overall. And any extensions to a 6-month pause should only be allowed at inspectors' discretion, where they are confident that LPAs can complete work in an agreed timeline, and that the inspector will consider the evidence provided by the authority to support the plan and any representations which have been put forward by local people and other interested parties. In most cases, the examination will include hearing sessions which are held in public, and the inspector will work with the authorities to determine the appropriate format for those sessions. And it goes on to say that that could be in person or virtual or even by telephone conference, or a blended mix of formats. And at the end of the examination, the inspector will send a report to the authority recommending whether or not they can adopt the plan. And in most cases, the report will recommend some changes that are necessary to allow the plan to be adopted. And these will be known as main modifications. In carrying out the examination, the inspector will be quite conscious of the benefits of having a robust and up-to-date plan adopted as quickly as possible, and will apply the principles of openness, fairness, and impartiality. The authority, of course, as always, is responsible for paying for the cost of the examining inspector. And for those who are interested in how much that's going to set them back, the fees are set out in the Town and Country Planning Costs of Independent Examinations Standard Daily Amount England Regulations 2006. Now, it remains to be seen what all the reforms, and there are lots of them coming down the track, impact in terms of the way in which local authorities need to deal with their local plans. But for now, that's the position we're currently at. Dennis, something a bit new from you, I think, something a bit different.
Indeed. I don't know how many Bitcoins you have, Helen, but I'm turning now to a story about Bitcoins. Indeed, I turn to a case featured in our recent Welsh Bulletin, a case that made national headlines and it's the case of Howells against the Newport Council, more commonly known as the Bitcoin in the bin case. The claimant said that a hard drive containing the private key to his Bitcoin was deposited in error at a landfill site owned and operated by Newport Council. He said that without the hard drive containing the private key, he was unable to access the Bitcoin. He wanted the landfill to be excavated in order to find the hard drive, but the council refused. His claim against the council failed and was dismissed, and judgment was given for the council. Now, the issue concerned the ownership of and rights of access to the claimant's hard drive that went into the council's landfill. The council's case was that the council owned the hard drive and that the claimant had no right to have it or to gain access to it, and the judge agreed with the council. This was because the Control of Pollution Act 1974, Section 14, subsection 6, paragraph C, provides that anything delivered to the authority by another person in the course of using the facilities shall belong to the authority and may be dealt with accordingly. This was, in the opinion of the judge, a complete answer to Mr. Howells' claim. Belong was a normal English word, and the words shall belong to the authority are unqualified and unrestricted. And indeed the words and may be dealt with accordingly are important and confer a practical right upon the council. So here's the question. Why did this matter to the claimant, Mr. Howells? Well, Mr. Howells said that his now former partner had erroneously placed the hard drive containing the Bitcoin wallet in the bin. It was apparently worth over £650 million. Now, Mr. Howells has since parted not only with his partner, but also with his legal team and plans to start again. Helen.
I mean, 650 million, that's a lot of money, and it's still technically there, but at the same time, it's lost forever. It's an interesting concept, Bitcoin. If I was Newport though, and I had that kind of judgment of shall belong, I think I'd be out there with a shovel.
Well, I would be far behind.
Now, sticking with the theme of money in the form of the Public Accounts Committee, a little bit of a tie there. The Public Accounts Committee has produced a report on support for children and young people with special educational needs, which the government has 2 months to respond to. And in the report, the committee states, and we know this, but it's good to sort of have an official letter that the government needs to think about in relation to send. It says that the system to support children and young people with special educational needs in England is reaching, or arguably has already reached, crisis point. And that's despite a 58% increase in the Department of Education's high needs funding over the last decade. It hasn't kept pace with the demand, following a 140% increase in the number of children with educational, health and care plans. And that's a debate for another day, why we're seeing such an increase, but I think that's complex and nuanced. Outcomes for children, it says, have not improved, which inevitably undermines parents' confidence in the system. Too many families struggle to get the help their child desperately needs, with long waiting times for assessments and support, and tribunal cases rising. Now, in 2023, only half of EHC plans were issued within the statutory 20-week period. And whether children receive support depends too much on their postcode or how well their parents can navigate an often chaotic and adversarial system. Now, this is quite shocking. Only 2.5% of local authority decisions on EHCs were appealed at a tribunal in 2023. However, and this is the point I'm getting to, the tribunals found partly or wholly in favour of parents and carers in 98% of cases. That's a staggering statistic. And the Public Accounts Committee agrees, and it says it undermines families' confidence in the system, and that without urgent action, the department, that's the Education Department, risks a lost generation of children leaving school without receiving the help they need. And as well as not delivering outcomes, the SEND system is unaffordable, placing a significant strain on local authority finances. There just aren't the places. Most worryingly, the Accounts Committee says government does not know how it will address immediate financial challenges faced by local authorities, where for many years local authority spending has outstripped departmental high needs funding, leading to substantial deficits. Now, Councillor Aruj Shah, who's the chair of the Local Government Association's Children and Young People Board, has said that the committee is right to describe the failing SEND system as an emergency, and its report reflects Council's long-standing concerns over the need for more inclusive provision and the immense financial pressures on councils to be adequately addressed. Huge problem, and they need to get their thinking caps on, frankly. And on that note, that's it for another edition of the podcast. You can read more on that, the items discussed today, and many more besides by going to bulletin number 3, available on the LLG website now. So it's goodbye from me.
And from me too. Bye now.